Good evening. Open your Bibles, if you would, to 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5. I'm sure we all know, not most of us know, that God has a special place in his heart for widows and orphans. We read about situations, especially about widows, all throughout the Old Testament. We read about it in the New Testament. God has a heart for widows. One of my favorite stories found in 2 Kings chapter 4, there was that widow who was married to one of the prophets, and he had died, and apparently he had a lot of debt. And she had no means of paying off this debt, and when those who they owed came to collect, she didn't have the money. And so they were going to take her only 2 sons. And chances were they were either to take those kids as slaves or sell them off as slaves, and she didn't know what to do. What a heartbreaking situation. To have this woman who was married to a prophet, a man of God, and they incurred too much debt in life. They had no way to pay it off. And now where could she turn to? So she turns to Elisha, the prophet. She comes to him asking, what can I do? Telling him the situation, and he asked her, what do you have in your home? She had a jar of oil, and that was it. So he told her, go to the town, gather every pot and container you could find, and take it to your house. And so she does that. And he told her, when you bring all these things together, take your jar of oil and pour it into the pots. And she does it. No questions asked. Could you imagine that? You go to find help to deal with some creditors. You don't want to lose your sons. And the prophet tells you, collect all the pots, take the one part of the oil you have and start pouring it into the other pots. No questions asked. She begins to do it, and she begins to pour and pour and pour, filling up all the pots. Now, at that point, it seems rather obvious what she should do, right? Go sell the oil and pay off the debt, but she doesn't do that. After she fills up all the pots, she goes back to Elisha, and she says, here's what happened. Now what? She looks for some wisdom from the prophet of God, and he tells her, take it, sell it, and then live on the rest and pay off those debtors. And God takes care of the widow and her children for their lives and for their belief and trust in him. And not only do we read about widows and orphans there, even in Exodus chapter 22, verses 22 to 24, after the 10 Commandments, it says, you shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict him at all, and if he does cry out to me, I will surely hear his cry, and my anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. That's pretty serious. That's pretty serious. Basically, God's saying, don't mess with the widows and the orphans. Leave them alone. And God often expressed concern for them. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. Then when we get to the New Testament, Acts chapter 6, we know about that one, where the Hellenistic Jew widows, they were being neglected in the handing out of daily rations of food. So they had to appoint people to overlook that and take care of that. James, when he wrote his letter in James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So we see that the simplest, the purest form of godliness is to protect and provide for the vulnerable and the defenseless. And it's not just for widows and orphans. We're going to be talking about that this evening because we're in 1 Timothy, and that's the section that has to do with that. But as Alex was saying, we see great distress for our brothers and our sisters over there in Maui, and they're trying to help their community and reach out to them. And even Jesus did this when he would reach out, helping the people all around. Remember, they would come in great crowds to hear him speak, and they needed food. And the disciples would come and say, hey, the people need food. What do we do? Oh, you feed them. And then he would perform that miracle to take care of them. He always had a heart and a concern for people. He would use those needs also for an opportunity to bring them the truth. And here's another phenomenal opportunity for the congregation of Maui to reach out to that community, for them to see and know about the love of God and his children. And so we want to help with that. We want to help with situations like that and other situations that are happening in our own community. But specifically tonight, we want to talk about widows here in 1 Timothy chapter 5. And some general observation I want us to take a look at here. Although concern for widows is scattered all throughout the Bible, there's no more extensive, really, section of Scripture devoted to the topic than what we find right here in 1 Timothy chapter 5. Maybe it strikes us as unusual that Paul would devote so much space to the proper care of widows, but consider the day in which Timothy is working his work there. We should remember that many men were ostracized. They were being persecuted because they had left the Jewish faith and they became Christians, or they became Christians. And remember how some of those in Ephesus, they described it. Paul came and turned the world upside down. They were losing money. So they didn't want anybody going to that religion. It was costing them money. So anyone who would do that, they would probably cut them off from certain parts of society, or cut them off from their family, or persecute them, or maybe even kill them. So now we have a lot of widows, a lot of young widows as well, perhaps, there in Ephesus. And Paul feels the need to address this particular situation of what's happening there in Ephesus. Apparently they have a lot of widows of differing ages and differing backgrounds. And so Paul is going to help Timothy and others to put all this together on what to do. So here's an overview of the passage we're going to be looking at. Widows in genuine need. We'll see that verse 3, 5, first part of verse 16. Widows who have living relatives, widows who live carnal lives, widows who are on the list, and widows who are young. And an observation that surfaces is that we need to be careful with how we spend the church funds, right? This is the Lord's money. And how we spend that matters, what we spend it on. And so we should always be, no matter how much we may have, careful. So I appreciate Mick and Alex. They're always mindful about what they give. Sometimes I have these ideas, hey, here's a great thing we need to give to. I hand it to them. They're like, no, Chris, we're not going to do that. I'm like, oh, okay. But they're always mindful. They're very careful with the things of God. They take that work that they have as elders quite seriously. But let's look at Paul's specific guidelines. Who should the church support? Which widows qualify for support? 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 3. Honor widows who are widows indeed. Widows indeed. That word honor there, if you remember from several weeks ago when we were talking about elders, remember elders were worthy of double honor. This is the verb form of that same word of honor. And if you remember, we were talking about that as a reference or a command, has financial applications, but that meaning goes beyond just mere material provision. But financial needs there is definitely in play there with the elders, here as well with the widows. So who are these widows who are in need? Well, they're a widow who has no living relatives, verse 4. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. So when the primary breadwinner in Timothy's days died, the responsibility for the widow's care fell to her immediate family, her children or her grandchildren. Maybe some of the believers there in Ephesus were mistreated, or were put to ministering, were avoiding their obligations, where their mother was in great need, but they didn't want to deal with that. Well, here we have Paul saying, children, take care of your parents when you get older. I see that happening quite a bit. I know Alex and Sheila are helping both of their parents. They've been struggling with a lot of things, going out and visiting, bringing them in, making sure they're taken care of. I know Mick and Linda have, not necessarily their parents, but your aunt, you're taking care of, brought her into her own home. I know many people here who have done that. I know Theo has done that for his mother-in-law. I haven't had the opportunity to take care of my parents. They haven't had that need. But Jenny and I have discussed many opportunities where, what would we do? How would we do this if the need arises? Could we do this? And we would, because we see that from God asking us and telling us, commanding us to take care of our parents. And I also, of course, want our children to do the same for us. So we want to show that example to them as well. But maybe it's because maybe these Christians were avoiding this situation. Maybe that's why Paul used such strong language. When you drop down to verse 8, he says, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Children, teenagers, listen. Take care of your parents when they get older. How serious does God take this? Over in the Old Testament, he told them, if you hurt them, I'll kill you. He's telling those of that household, if they do not provide for their own, especially for those of his household, they have denied the faith and they're worse than an unbeliever. That's pretty serious. And caring for widows is putting religion into practice. It is pleasing to God. Not caring for them is a denial of the faith. It puts a person in worse shape in their spiritual lives than someone who's an unbeliever. But when a widow is without family to sustain her, then she should be able to depend upon the church. But notice, it's to the family first. They look to that first. The church can't do much about non-Christians who don't care for the widows and their families, but we can hold Christians accountable for caring for widows and their families. Elders are to be looking into that. I have seen them make some difficult decisions, telling people here's what needs to happen. And this is one of the many reasons why elders are worthy of double honor, because the kind of work they have to do and the decisions they have to make. It's hard and it is difficult. Second, the widows who are supposed to be helped are those who are godly women. Look at verses 5, 6, and 7. "Now she who is a widow indeed and who has been left alone has fixed her hope on God and continues in entreaties and prayers night and day. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. Prescribe these things as well so that they may be above reproach." So the church is supposed to support widows who demonstrate a preoccupation with the things of God, not those who live a worldly, promiscuous life. It's been my experience, and perhaps maybe yours, that godly widows are spiritual powerhouses. As they get older and more mature, and when they're on their own, I always think of Koki. There's Corky and Koki. Remember Koki? She would sit right here. And I could always tell when I'm preaching, when she did not agree with something that I said, and I saw that face, I knew at the end of the night or the morning, she would let me know right back there. But she always did it with gentleness and kindness. Or during Pew Packers, we actually mentioned this last Wednesday. She thought she was whispering, but I could always hear her, the answers to the Pew Packers as she was sitting back there, and she would let them know. She was always training, always giving bits of wisdom to all those who were willing to listen and learn. And she was always practicing and working hard at a godly living. She demonstrated this. This is exactly who Paul was writing about. Women like her and others. And not only do they have to be widows, I see this in a lot of the older ladies here within the congregation who try hard on helping the children, helping mine and others know and learn things about God as they are continue to demonstrate that kind of attitude. And you could say they're often the backbone of the church. It helps keep us together. They support church gatherings in the ministry. They often teach children's classes and are involved in these things. But on the other hand, a widow who is not godly can be a problem for the church. So the widows who are truly in need and who should be supported by the church are those who have no family to support them and those who live an honorable, godly lifestyle. Another category of widows whom the church should support are the widows on the list, verses 9 and 10 through 10. Now, early congregations, maybe just the church in Ephesus that Timothy was serving, kept a register of all the widows who were to receive ongoing financial support. That tells you something, doesn't it? If they needed to write down a list, how many did they have? Had to have been quite a few. Why is that? Why is that? So verses 9 and 10, he writes, a widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, having a reputation for good works, and if she has brought up children, if she has shown hospitality to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has assisted those in distress, and if she has devoted herself to every good work. So notice those qualifications. Number one on the list, she had to be at least 60 years old for reasons Paul gives later. Second, the widow must have been faithful to her husband during her marriage. She had to have a history of doing good works. Now, we don't know much about how this special group of widows was organized, but it's obvious that they first had to meet some specific qualifications, and then they had to follow through with those roles of good works. When they were put on the list, the congregation supported them financially, and they remained unmarried and involved in all kinds of service to the church and her family. You see what you have? So they had this list of those women who I would say, as we'll see in a little bit, they made a pledge to stay in the state they were in, and they were going to do this kind of work, this godly work. And they were going to be supported financially. Next, we notice that younger widows did not qualify for this list and did not receive ongoing support for two reasons. Verse 11 through 15. That's kind of hard to read. It's a little tight up there. Sorry for that. Starting in verse 11. But refuse to put younger widows on the list, for when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation, because they have set aside their previous pledge. At the same time, they also learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Therefore, I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach, for some have already turned aside to follow Satan. So, because number one, they want to remarry, but it's because they had made a pledge. They had set aside their previous pledge. What pledge is that? I think it was a pledge not to marry, to live godly lives and do this work for the church. And they put that aside. And then at the same time, they learned to be idle. Idle means you're sitting around doing nothing. You're not doing the work. If you're sitting around not doing work and you get bored, you get yourself in trouble. And so they were going around doing things they ought not to do. If they were busy in the work, then they would not have this issue of being idle, would they? And so you had this problem where they wouldn't keep the pledge, and they weren't being godly, and so they were ended up doing things they ought not to do, going around being busybodies and gossipers. And so these are reasons to keep them off the list. So incidentally, women are not the only ones who can become idlers, though, right? Not just women. Men can do this. What happened when we just sit around and we do nothing? We know we get in trouble. Our minds wander around into things that it should not wander into. We need to keep ourselves busy. And not just busy with whatever, but busy in the work, studying the Word of God, writing a journal or diary, doing the work, thinking about what we can do for the church and for the kingdom, looking ahead to not only our lives, but the lives of others around us. Like Alex was up in Maui back in May. I feel like that just worked so well with what we're talking about tonight. When all this happened up there in Maui, and rather than just think, man, I'm glad I wasn't there for that fire, he decided, I'm going to call up the congregation, see what's going on, see what we can do to help. He's staying busy in the good work of the Lord. And we all need to have that same kind of attitude. Here, specifically, we're talking about widows. And not just any, but widows on a list who've made a pledge. And we're looking at that. So what is the best course, looking back here at verses 11 to 15, the best course of action for the young widows? The best course of action is for them to stay busy. This whole thing where he says, get married, have children, manage your own homes, and give the enemy no opportunity, that is the typical role of women in that day and age. Is that the typical role of women in today's day and age? Yes and no. Yes and no. But the main thing Paul's getting at is for them to get busy. Don't be busy. Remember the person who stole? What did he tell those who steal? Steal no longer. Go get a job, and then what you make, give to others. Have a better attitude and stay busy with good things, rather than being idle, going around doing things you ought not to do. If idle hands are the devil's workshop, busy hands are God's workshop. And that's true for men as well as women. And Paul ends this discussion with a final reminder that the family and not the church is supposed to be the first line of support for the widows. Verse 16, if any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. God's will is for both the biological family to do its part and the spiritual family to do its part. I want to finish up with a few underlying truths that we learned, that caring for one's dependent parents and grandparents is a serious scriptural responsibility. The scripture commands parents to provide for their children. We read that in Proverbs chapter 19, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. But then there comes a time, as we were talking about earlier, those tables turn. Adult children are to take care of their parents when their parents are no longer able to care for themselves. Each family will need to decide the best way to care for the needy and the aged ones in their family. Some may decide that the best way to do that is have them to move in their home, but not everyone's going to be capable or able to do that. The important thing, though, is that believers show love and provide the support that is necessary. We ought to be planning for these things, knowing that these days may come. Each generation should train the next regarding this responsibility. And generally, in the past, and I feel like present day, that's not that pressing of a problem, is it? But as our society moves forward, we see, as we've already discussed many times, that our society is becoming more and more selfish. They're more thinking about themselves rather than others, and things like this will go to the wayside. We do see it to certain levels already out there where people are not taking care of their parents, not taking care of their grandparents, or those who are in need when they could, but they choose not to. Second, we learn that the church is never expected to support everyone in need. The ministry of compassion and care must be accompanied with discernment and wisdom. We would not be very good stewards of the Lord's resources if we just indiscriminately gave it out to whoever came by without first evaluating the legitimacy. So in some cases, the church has a clear responsibility. Other cases, it is clear that a person's family has the first responsibility. Third, we learn that a full, busy life is much safer than an idle one. When we spend our time serving the Lord, studying His Word, raising a family, earning an income, building quality relationships, then we will be less likely to fill empty hours with harmful activities. Keep ourselves busy for the Lord will help keep us out of trouble. Fourth, we learn that widows, especially older ones, can play a vital role in the church family. Loss of their loved one does not have to overwhelm or immobilize them permanently. Their newfound singleness can give them freedom to focus on the work of the Lord. They can draw closer to God. But that brings us to number 5. I want to encourage us to also keep in mind that the needs of widows are not merely financial. Not every problem faced by widows can be solved by money. In fact, a widow's financial needs may be the least pressing thing they may have. Other needs might be much more pressing, not necessarily money, but it could include the need of belonging, or the need for fellowship in face of the loneliness and the change or isolation, the need of self-worth and affirmation. These kinds of needs are resolved through relationships and not money. A simple phone call, a letter, a visit, and talking with them. And finally, when we care for widows and all the needy, we become more like God. The Bible says that our God is a husband to the widow, a father to the fatherless. This is Psalm 68, verse 5. A father of the fatherless and a judge for the widows is God in His holy habitation. When we love and care for widows and for other needy and the vulnerables, that are out there, then we become more like God. And so I know that when we get to that passage, it's very technical and just kind of knowledge-based, but there's so much there that we need to sometimes slow ourselves down and take stock in. God is a God of love. He's a God of compassion. He sent his own Son to die for you and me. Jenny and I have been watching that TV show, The Chosen. Have you heard of that? The Chosen TV show? So we were on season 2, episode 1. And it's talking there, showing the disciples with Jesus, the sons of thunder. And, of course, we don't know the full situation. We get a little bit in the Bible of how that name came about, but I like the way in the show they showed how that came, where there was these Samaritans, and they were throwing rocks at them. They were like, oh, let's bring fire and thunder down upon them and do all these things. Jesus, and Jesus like, what are you doing? No. You think that's why I came? Why did I come? He begins to describe to them that he came to bring people truth. And this is not the way to do it. He's there to build relationships and to show people the right way and the right way to love them. And so he uses that as an opportunity to teach them a lesson. And then he began to call them sons of thunder, and it stuck. And have you ever stopped to wonder, did he say that to them just as a reprimand only, or not just to make them remember? But I bet you it was both ways. Sons of thunder because of the harsh attitude they had toward the Samaritans, but sons of thunder is also, why? Because of that same energy, I said this in the show, that same energy can be used toward doing good rather than evil. It all depends on how you perceive things, how you see this world. Are you looking at this world from your own eyes or from the perspective of God? Have you died to self and lived for Christ? And if you live for Christ, you're seeing things from his perspective, from God's perspective. He had a love for the needy, for the poor, for the widows, and for the orphans. So much so that if you so much as hurt them, he'd kill you. Take care of them. Have the right attitude. When Ken was talking about praying for everyone in the congregation, and when we hear also in our prayers about praying for those who are shut-ins and those who are in need, we ought to be doing that every single day. Put yourself in their shoes. What if you were a widow or a widower? What if you were a shut-in and you could not be here? Remember when we were during the COVID lockdowns, how badly did we want to get back together and have these relationships? And there's so many are out there right now, they want to be here and they can't be here. When was the last time you prayed for them? When was the last time you called them? Or even just visited them? God expects and commands that you and I do that. Because that's his heart. And that's the heart you and I should have as well. Let us think about that